Today's video may actually offend you if you jizz at the mentioning of Hasbro, or if you actually named one of your children Hasbro, although that's kind of sick behavior and you should be locked up for that. I mean, imagine the kind of bullying that they'll receive for being named Hasbro. I'm actually wondering whether that's even an option. I mean, can you actually name your child after a really big company, a really big entity? I wonder if that's like a copyright infringement. I'll Google that later. Anyways, all jokes, all babbling aside, today's video, well, it is a lot of more babbling, but it's about action figures. In today's video, I wanted to talk a little bit about the Black Series line and how I personally feel like it's getting left behind by, well, every other line that Hasbro has, and just action figures in general. And it's really sad to see, because you have like the G.I. Joe's line, and I get it, that's Hasbro's own line, and that's where they get most of the love, and they can throw all of the accessories at, and some great articulation, some great sculpt work, absolutely phenomenal figures. But I get it, that's their baby, that they planted the seed, they grew that entire franchise from the ground up. So I completely get that they would choose to throw everything at that particular line. Their deluxe figures, for example, come with a plethora of different accessories. They come with jetpacks. They even come with, you know, like blast effect pieces, things of that nature. We're starting to see way more vehicles released in the G.I. Joe line. And look, I get it. A lot of people are going to point at that line as, you know, it's an outlier because it's owned by Hasbro. But you can take a look at other examples. You have the Marvel Legends line, for example. We just got the Renew Your Vows Spider-Man. We've been getting a lot of new pinless technology action figures. I think we're getting a new pinless technology Iron Man. I think we have already received one version that's pinless. Pinless Wolverine, the new female body molds. I mean, they're definitely using that modern day technology, that modern day engineering on some of their newer Marvel Legends action figures. So I'm a little bit baffled as to why the Black Series line is getting left behind. That makes absolutely no sense. And I'll give you guys an example. And by the way, let me be very clear, because people tend to attack me for this specific reason, but I'm only going to use a few figures as an example. I'm not going to go through the entire Black Series line or through my entire collection and explain exactly what's going on to you guys. I'm just going to give you guys, you know, a couple of examples of figures that I have lying around on my desk or my little, you know, display area, and just to kind of prove my point. Now, we definitely have some solid action figures from the Black Series line. I think like Bo-Katan is a perfect example. I love the head sculpt without the helmet. It's really well done. I mean, for a, you know, $22, $23 collectible, I think the head sculpt is pretty accurate to the source material. I love the body mold. I love the sculpt. I love the attention to detail with all of her armor. Same thing with the original Mandalorian figure that had like the piece together armor before he got the Beskar armor. I love that figure as well. The articulation isn't all there. I think, if I remember correctly, the Bo-Katan is like single jointed elbows, single jointed knees, no butterfly joints, things of that nature. But it's solid articulation coupled with like really good sculpt work and really good paint apps. So even though it's not perfect, it's a solid addition to anybody's collection. Same thing with a lot of the Star Wars vintage figures that I've been picking up. That Boba Fett Star Wars vintage Target exclusive retro carded action figure had similar articulation scheme to some of the Black Series action figures, and that's crazy because they're completely different scales. They're completely different price points, and you would assume that the Star Wars vintage line, the articulation at least, and some of the paint applications are going to be not on par with the Black Series line, but that's not the case at all. Sometimes it's like a 1-for-1, just because the Star Wars vintage line is much smaller. It's like the 4-inch line, whereas in the other one is closer to like the 6-inch mark. So it's, you know, I wouldn't say it's like twice the size, but close to it. So it would make more sense that the Black Series line would completely like dust the Star Wars vintage line, but that's not the case at all. And I know that there have been some people, and they've even mentioned it in previous some of my previous videos, that they feel like they would much rather prefer a good solid sculpt, something where it's, you know, the articulation wouldn't break up the body mold, just for the sake of the figure looking more aesthetically pleasing in the display. But I disagree with that. I mean, you know, at a 1/12 scale, coming from a $25 collectible, I expect there to be like some standards in terms of articulation and the body sculpt, I mean, and I've always said this before, I'll 100% support an OM that is willing to break up a sculpt just a little bit more for the sake of articulation. Even if some of the joints look a little bit gappy or a little bit weird, I would prefer that because I can get the figures into really dynamic poses. And I'm just going to give you guys a couple of examples. The Chewbacca body mold, this is from an archives. I don't remember what exact Chewie this is, but I ran into the problem with this particular figure. The single jointed elbows and knees they're okay. I mean, for this particular figure, I get it. He's not going to get into some crazy poses, but still, the ankle rockers are not great. I think the fur, the way that they sculpted the fur, really gets in the way of being able to get into some crazy poses. Like I said, single jointed elbows, single jointed knees, no butterfly joints, and then the way that they sculpted the head and the fur around the neck area, that really limits articulation. You can't look to the side, can't look up or down. I'm not an engineer, so I'm not going to tell you what the solution here is, but it's definitely not to essentially put no effort into the articulation. I think this particular way of molding a figure makes absolutely no sense to me. I also have, which I believe is episode 5, Luke and Han Solo. Both of them run into the same issues, even when they have the double jointed knees. For some reason, they're not able to articulate well enough with the knees. The ankle rockers are okay. I mean, I'm not really going to complain too much about it, but the single jointed elbows, I just don't understand that. Like I said, there are people out there that would prefer the body mold not be broken up, but that's just not who I am. I would much rather get these figures into really dynamic poses, especially the Luke. I mean, we do see Luke do some pretty crazy things on screen, and so it just makes no sense to me. No butterfly joints. The head articulation is an absolute joke. They could, give them a slightly thinner neck and then do the forward and backwards hinge on a ball joint for the neck just to add that extra articulation, and then maybe that floating ball joint at the mid torso with a hinge to get him into some crazy poses. I'm just saying, look, it's Luke. He's a Jedi. He's supposed to be able to crouch and, really get crazy with some of the dynamic poses that I see on screen, or just take some liberties myself. I mean, like I said, Jedis are supposed to be somewhat articulated. They are supposed to get into some pretty dynamic poses, especially Luke, who's supposed to be one of the younger Jedis by episode 5. So it makes absolutely no sense to me. Same thing with Han. They could easily do. And by the way, these figures don't have like the best head sculpts, and some of the molding is okay. So it's not like they're the excuse here is that they're throwing more effort or more of the budget into the molding, and that's why the articulation isn't there. It just makes no sense to me. I'm okay with them breaking up the body mold just a little bit for like I said, a better ab crunch, or break it up for some butterfly joints. Same thing with some of the like first order stormtroopers. I know people hate the first order, or hate the source material for the Rey trilogy, as I like to call it. But personally, I think there are some of those massively underrated army builders. I love the First Order. I know they're not everybody's favorite, and I've said this before in a number of different videos. Don't hate on the source material, because sometimes the figures can be a little bit surprising. So just to give you guys some examples, the First Order stormtroopers could have some minor key features updated. As I mentioned with the other figures, I would love a ball joint with a forward and backwards hinge, and then same thing with the ab crunch. Maybe break it up a little bit more, add a ball joint in there in the mid torso or that floating torso, and then get just a little bit more forwards. Same thing with the butterfly joints. It's funny because the body mold makes it look like maybe at one point they thought about adding butterfly joints to these stormtroopers, and then they changed their mind, and it seems like the sculpting, like they cut away at the sculpt but then changed their minds and then just added it back in. So it makes no sense to me. I'm not sure exactly what they were going for there, but just more frustration on my end. I'm not saying every single character in the Star Wars universe like Yoda or maybe Count Dooku need butterfly joints, but I'm saying that at least sprinkle it on there. Try out some double jointed elbows on people like Skywalker, Luke, or Anakin, or Obi-Wan. I really want to be able to get those into some really cool, like classic Jedi poses. I will say, in terms of the body molds and the head sculpts, the Black Series line is usually ahead of all of the other lines that Hasbro has to deal with, but I don't think that should be a trade-off for articulation. I think they should find a way to balance everything that an action figure can offer to a collector. But again, that's just my personal take, my personal opinion. I may be making too much out of nothing, and honestly, I feel like only people that collect multiple different lines from Hasbro, or just different action figure lines in general, will understand. People that only collect Black Series may be a little bit blind to these type of features that the line from Hasbro is holding back on. But I'm very curious to see what all of you guys have to say. Let me know down below in the comment section. Am I wrong? Am I right? Am I completely delusional? Let me know down below. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. As always, enjoy the hobby. It's the most important part of all of this. Make sure to stay tuned because we do upload pretty consistently. We ramble on about action figures, our favorite part of the day. So let me know your thoughts. Thank you guys for tuning in. I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you.